Hello, everybody. How are you? How's your sandwich? Banging. What's inside? Chicken? Same? Ham and cheese. Very good. Welcome to the Creator Economy stage. Brought to you by our beautiful friends at Snapchat, as you can see here. This is day 3, the last but not least day of MadFest. And we have got a morning of incredible talks for you. So, as you know, this is just the morning today, and then we're going to go to an after party afterwards, so long as everyone knows. Did you know that? There's an after party after lunch, so you can swap your coffee for something else then. So I'm Hannah Parvaz. I've been working in advertising for more than a decade, and yes, I've won lots of awards as well. And now I run my own product consultancy and advertising agency called Aperture. These are my socks. Before we get started, a tiny bit of housekeeping. This stage, as you can tell by wearing the headphones, is a bit like a silent disco. So all you need to do at the end is just leave your headphones back on your seat. And number 2, we should have time for some questions today. So if you have anything burning to ask, all you need to do is open the MadFest app, click on Q&A, pop your question in, and then I will deliver that question for you. So that is it. Next up, we have a fantastic conversation from our friends over here, which is moderated by Raf McDonnell. Give us a wave, Raf. Here he is. On how to work more effectively with content creators. So without further ado, let's put our hands together and welcome Raf McDonnell, a real-life content creator called Lauren Spearman. Hey, Lauren. And Carlie Wittred to the stage. Woo!
Thank you. Thank you and good morning. I'm Raf McDonnell. I'm really pleased to be here at MadFest because I started my career in marketing many years ago at Walker's Crisps and then Coca-Cola before moving into the entertainment industry and now working with talent. I was at EMI, CA and Amazon working with lots of different celebrity and music talent. And then set up Talent and Brands, my agency, about 6 years ago. We also set up a new business called Supernova back in September, which are now both part of the Atomic London Advertising Group. So it's weird to come sort of full circle back into the advertising industry again. So we're going to talk today about 5 key lessons from working with creators. I'm going to introduce our guests in a second. But before I do that, I'm going to give you 3 key lessons from going on holiday, because I came back from holiday last night, from 2 weeks holiday. So lesson number 1, unbreakable waterproof phone cases are not unbreakable and they're not waterproof. Number 2, iPhones are also not waterproof. Number 3, having a dead iPhone for the second week of your holiday is the best thing you'll ever do to experience your holiday. I can thoroughly recommend it. So for anyone who's going on holiday, throw your phone in the water. You'll have the best holiday of your life. Apart from this morning, when none of the apps loaded on the new phone, and I couldn't get it anywhere. But apart from that, those are my 3 lessons from holidays. So, after working with lots of celebrity talent, I started working with creators in 2021. My daughter had a friend, and she suggested I started managing a content creator. And I said, no way, I'm not going to manage a content creator. Here I am a few years later doing that. And we now have a roster of content creators that we manage, from the likes of Rob Mayhew, who some of you may know from the advertising industry, who I manage, through to our very own Lauren Spearman, who's one of our creators, and creators from the worlds of music, art, gardening, business, and lots of different backgrounds. So today we're going to talk about the 5 ways to work creatively with creators, or more effectively with creators. So let me give you a little background on our panel. So we have Lauren Spearman at the end here. Lauren's really embraced the squiggly career concept. Very different roles at Sky, NetMums, Benefit Cosmetics, and then Made.com, where she was global head of comms and social, and then at Many Pets as global head of comms and engagement, before she went freelance in 2023, working with brands such as Habitat. Some of you may have followed Lauren's journey on social media when she decided to turn to social media to document her journey into this world, often calling out really bad practices and poor practices in the world of recruitment. And then this led her to really carving out her new squiggly career as an unlikely content creator with over 50 or nearly 50,000 followers on TikTok now and millions of views on her videos. So that's Lauren. And then to my left we have Carlie. Carlie is head of brand marketing and communications at Gousto, leading tech unicorn in the UK. She spent 7 years in the business leading teams to achieve major milestones, including taking the employees from 250 now to 2,000, the only profitable B Corp in the UK with over 200 million investment. And she's played a pivotal role in growing Gousto's brand awareness sevenfold and working with the likes of Joe Wicks as an investor, as an ambassador, earning her recognition in campaigns, magazines, Faces to Watch. She's worked with many PR agencies such as, Hill & Knowlton and Fleischmann Hillard previously, with brands such as General Mills, Bayer, Mondelez and Britvic. So that's the introductions. Today we're going to talk about the 5 key ways to work effectively with creators. So let's just start with getting some experience from both of you, having been on different sides. So Lauren, you were a brand person working with creators. Now you're a creator working with brands. How does that feel, being on the other side?
Love it. So for a bit of context, I used to head up influencer marketing at made.com, and so I've been on this stage before about 4 or 5 years ago talking about how to work with creators. It feels so weird. I still can't call myself a creator, but it feels really weird coming from the other side. But hopefully I'm all right to work with them. So Raf's my agent.
Oh, I should have said that. Yeah, sorry.
But yeah, I think it's interesting having worked brand side. I kind of feel like I know what brands want to hear or see or how to behave. So hopefully I've got a bit of an edge from that point of view.
Okay. And Carlie, so you've had a journey working at Gousto with lots of creators. Why do you think this is an important part now for brands in today's world to work with creators?
Good question. So creators have literally been intrinsic to growing our brand and business since we first started kind of brand marketing about 7 years ago. So originally when Gousto came about, the category was really nascent. No one knew what we were about, what we offered, and actually influencers were our first way to kind of build trust and credibility with consumers, with audiences that just needed to understand what our kind of product offered. So that's where we kind of started with creators, and then as our business kind of grew and evolved, we started kind of thinking about it a bit differently and embarking on long-term relationships with talent and influencers so they could not just help kind of drive awareness, but also drive consideration as well. So one of our kind of headline partners was Joe Wicks, who we worked with for 3 years, brought in as an investor and an ambassador, but also worked with the likes of kind of Catherine Ryan, father of daughters, Mother Paka. And I think what's interesting now is we're now embarking on this kind of new stage of growth where we're seeing this huge proliferation of just digital content, and we're looking at our creators to help us speak to all our different customer segments and appeal to all those different kind of requirements that everyone has. So it's definitely something that's been fundamental to our success, our growth as we move forward. And now more than ever, we're investing in it and looking at how we can leverage creators and how they think and what they know about the world of TikTok and their channels, and learning from them, really.
Well, that takes us really nicely to lesson number 1 we're going to talk about, which is how do you identify the right creators for your brand? So maybe back to you, Carlie. When you're looking for creators, what makes a good creator for the Gousto brand? What are you looking for?
Yeah, it's a really good question because there's literally thousands now, and I'm definitely not the best person on the team to ask. There's a lot of our team here that are much more plugged into culture and who's hot. But I think when we think of creators, I think first and foremost, authenticity. So I think we've all seen those creators online that are plugging brands that just don't feel like them. I think intuitively we want to work with people that genuinely use Gousto. Because there's got to be that element of believability. So that's number 1. I think secondly, we know our brand. So we talk about our brand personality being kind of colourful, creative, confident, and having this kind of brand swagger and this wonderful kind of head-turning wit. So when we're looking at the talent and the influencers that are out in the world and the creators, we're trying to find people that understand that, who emulate that, who we can work with kind of moving forward. So I think from our point of view, it's authenticity, just plugging into culture, seeing who's kind of hot, and just really understanding as well, what our brand is and who's a fit for us as well.
And Lauren, from your point of view, how do you decide what's the right brand for you to work with? Because you get approached, you've been both sides, and now you're having to make those decisions. Do I want to expose my personal brand, as in Lauren Spearman, to these brands? What's the thought process behind that for you?
I'm actually going to quote someone else. We were at a talk a few months ago with Professor Green, and he was talking about when he does partnerships and stuff. And his kind of benchmark is, he said, he gets called out a lot, he gets trolled a lot, and he's like, I've been called the C word many times, but I've never been called a sellout. So that's my kind of benchmark of like, is someone going to call me out and be like, this absolutely isn't you? And also it's just a gut feeling, like there's a, you've sent me over a few and I'm like, absolutely not. Because I just don't want to, I think the reason that I've grown my account is because I'm absolutely honest and transparent, and I don't feel like I want to sell myself out for like an ad or two. But I would say, when we talk about like, from a brand point of view, one of my biggest like successes when I was at Made was actually going after who's talking about our competitors. I think we always look at who's talking about us and who's talking about our brand. But actually, we used to like, who was like talking the most about IKEA, and then we'd like try and build a relationship with them and like pull them over so they'd talk about us a little bit more. So we really looked at like, in terms of like share of voice, who was talking about all the different interiors brands, and we try and like steal that share from other brands. So it's not just who's talking about you, it's who's not, and how can you bring them over.
Yeah, and I think that converting of people over becomes like your biggest success stories as well. So it's really smart.
I mean, I'm going to talk about actually Professor Green again, because one of my clients, and he talks very well about how to work with brands in a minute. But I think there's an interesting point you made there about not selling out, and that it's not just about the brand fit and it's not just about the money, right? 'Cause somebody could come and offer you loads of money, but then actually the challenge is to make it really fit for you. It's not about the money, is it?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to commercialise my TikTok if I didn't have the following. So like they are like, the people that follow me are the most important people, and I will never like lose sight of that. So I don't want to do something that like kind of like, I don't know, makes a fool of the community, or that's really precious.
And I think, as an agent, my role is to find that middle ground where no brief's perfect. No brief's the perfect money with the perfect brand, apart from Gousto, who obviously have perfect briefs. But it's always, there's a bit of a compromise, so there are things that the creator might not feel comfortable with, but if the money's okay, then maybe they would, and if not, and so it's just finding and working with the brand or the agency to get through those challenges and make sure that when the deal comes together, everyone's happy and that they're happy to move forward on the terms that have been agreed. And I think then you get a great partnership. And you mentioned, sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, Laura made a really great point about not wanting to be a sellout, and from a brand point of view, there's a lot of kind of names that get dropped in that we can work with, and we definitely look at it through the lens of like, how authentic is this? Has this person just worked with everyone? And that is a big kind of factor in our decision making as well. So actually being careful and considered on the talent side is really important for kind of future prospects and relationships too.
And Lauren, you mentioned followers and engagement and views. What's most important, you think, and Carlie, I want to hear from you from a brand point of view. What's most important when you're selecting creators? Are you looking at views, engagement, or followers, a combination of them? And what, from your followers' point of view, what do you think? So maybe Carlie first, what are you looking at?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I think it depends kind of what your brand objectives are. But for us, with a first focus on kind of driving brand love and consideration, it's very much about engagement, so quality content that people want to interact with. I think what's interesting is finding creators that can do the job of both driving reach, but also even kind of driving acquisition sign-ups as well. So for us, primarily on engagement at this point in time, but it changes based on kind of brand needs at the time, and it's about finding the people that are fit for purpose and at that brief at the time. Because
Lauren, you get immediate feedback, right? So the great thing about what you do is you put a post up, and then within 1 second, you've got people telling you whether they like it, don't like it, or sharing it. So how do you measure success?
The way I measure success is I predominantly use TikTok. I try to use LinkedIn, but I keep
trying to get to use LinkedIn.
I'm like forcing myself to post. But TikTok, and the way I think I measure my own success is through the saves. So if I know a video has got a lot of saves, I know that that's provided some value. Or saves and shares for me is the thing that I probably look at the most. Because I know it's something that someone either wants to come back to, or they have shared with a friend because it's of value. So I guess everything I do, I always think like, what's going to offer the most value, and that's success for me.
It's funny, you're the first creator that's ever said that to me, by the way, about looking at saves as a measure of success. It's something, until you told me that, it's not something I'd looked at. And now I look at that a lot more in terms of how people saving your content, because that's the ultimate expression of their love for your content, if they're going to save that piece of content down.
I think so. I see it a lot when I recommend books and podcasts or courses and things like that. That's where I see the most saves. Or one the other day, I talked about what you do if you're at a bit of a crossroads and you hate your job but you don't know where you're going, which I was like, oh, I feel sad that that's been saved so many times, because it shows there's a lot of people that aren't loving their job right now. But yeah, I think for me that's like super important.
I think,
So
I was just going to say, I think what plays into that, we were talking just before the session about the fact that people are using kind of TikTok now as much as they're using kind of Google search. So it just shows the appetite to find, discover content and save it is a real indication of like people engaging with it. So I agree, I think saves is definitely one of the factors to watch. So
I think we've covered number one, identifying the right creator for your brand. We're going to move on to lesson number two, which is about briefing and paying creators properly. So firstly, Lauren, as a creator, what makes a good creator brief?
One where there's scope for you to write the concept. I mean, I've been very fortunate. Like, I haven't had a really like brief that's been like, you have to do this, and I just wouldn't do it. That's not going to work. But yeah, the best briefs are one where there's like, you get to direct what the content's going to be, and like there's really clear deliverables. Like anything with a timeline, I'm so unorganized. Anything with a timeline, deadlines, that's a good brief. But with also the scope that you can input into that, because like I've got to take like the consumer truth of like what my community would be interested in, and then the brand truth of what they want to share and pull it together. So I'm going to be in a good position to do that. So having that scope, I think, is important.
I mean, I'd add my perspective as an agent that gets the briefs and contracts before Lauren even sees them. The bit that I'm sometimes shocked at is brands where the brief bears no resemblance to the deal that you've actually agreed, which happens quite a lot. You get a contract, you've got the services outlined, then you get the brief, and in the brief there's exclusivity clauses and all sorts of other stuff that was never mentioned, up front. So having that transparency at the beginning and making sure, I'd rather get a brief before we get the contract, actually, because then you know what you're dealing with and then the contract should reflect what the brief was. Is that your experience, Carlie, of how you would work it? Or?
Yeah, definitely. I think you're absolutely right in terms of making sure you've got all the components laid out up front, and more so, we want usage rights to a lot of that content to leverage in our online and digital channels. Those conversations are much harder to have after the event. So I think it's about capturing and being really clear what you want up front. I think, as Lauren said, when we worked with creators, like we're working with creators because we want their kind of point of view on the world, we want their style, we want their audience to kind of love it. So when we brief, it's much more focused around what's the business challenge, what we're trying to tackle, a little bit about our brand, who are we, how do we show up in the world, but what we're looking for is that kind of response back that feels, intuitively like the creator, and that's really important. So I think briefs, like anything, can always get better, right? But sharpening them, making sure you're clear on how you want to use that content up front, then facilitates, a really nice relationship when you're moving forward, and you can focus on the good stuff and making kind of content that really resonates.
I like your comment or your point about those conversations are harder to have if you haven't had them at the beginning. Again, something my experience is I'd much rather an agency or brand came at the beginning and said, we need this many posts on these platforms with this exclusivity, and our payment terms are X, and we're going to have this paid content, and we're going to use it on our website, because if you lay all that out, we can have a proper conversation. But so many times you agree a deal, and then the contract comes through with half of these things, 90-day payment terms. So that actually sort of leads us on to payment, actually. How do you...
Yes.
We've had a few of those where I have to go back to the agency and say, well, if you'd have told us at the beginning it was 90-day payment terms, either we wouldn't have done it, or we'd quote you a different price, or we'd look at some other way of working with you. So what's your thoughts on how you get paid fairly in the industry? What represents getting paid fairly for the work you do?
Yeah, so I guess a hot topic at the moment is around payment terms. Like, we're seeing the rise of, traditionally it's always been 30-day payment terms for content, and we're seeing that squeezed up more and more. We've had a lot through recently, like 60-day payment terms, some are 90, and I'm like, do you honestly think I want to do a piece of work and not get paid for 3 months? Like, it's bonkers. Like, we wouldn't do that anywhere else. So again, I think it's ridiculous, and I just think it's quite disrespectful. And again, I've previously worked brand side, where the thought of even putting a contract in front of someone and saying, I'm going to pay you for 90 days is absurd. So I think in terms of fairness, we have to be realistic that a lot of content creators are working freelance, and they deserve the respect to be paid on time.
I mean, it's something we feel really passionate about in terms of championing that. It's not always possible, because there are some big companies who will impose their payment terms on you. But I think as creator content becomes more used, one of the things I've always said to brands or agencies is, do you pay your employees every 30 days? Well, yeah, you do. So why wouldn't you pay the creators for the content they make? Because that's their living as well. Carlie, do you have a sort of view on how you pay creators fairly? And I know you work with creators in different ways financially, so that might be something to talk about.
Yeah, I think, look, when you're negotiating kind of a deal with any creator, like, it's all very different, right? Different scopes, different deliverables, different thing you want from them. I think what's really interesting about working with creators is how you can structure the commercial deals. So lots of people start with just a kind of blanket base fee, but when we go into some of our deals, we look at whether we can reward on performance, as well as kind of a standard fee. We look at whether we can offer equity deals, and so especially if you're in kind of scale up smaller businesses where you haven't got the luxury of huge budgets, there are ways and means you can get these relationships away where everyone kind of on both sides of the relationship feels rewarded, but also feels inspired. It's actually quite good sometimes having kind of targets that everyone's kind of working behind. But being remunerated for your time is really important. I think these creators spend a lot of days' work not working for other people to create content for your brand. So paying on time, paying fairly is really important. So I think it goes back to what you said at the start, is laying all of that out up front and making sure everyone's happy, and then you can focus on what's important, which is the main thing.
I think with a little bit about payment terms, we probably are preaching to the converted. I don't think anyone's going to disagree with that. So it's more about like encouraging you to have those conversations with your finance team to explain that. Because I've been in so many conversations where I've had to go to like our finance team and be like, I don't want to keep chasing. So I don't think it's probably us in the marketing teams that have an issue with that. But it's, I guess, enabling you to have that conversation with the finance team.
And Lauren, how do you decide how much you're worth? Right? I mean, that sounds awful, but how do you decide that? Because obviously we have conversations about it, but you've got to have a view on how much you're worth. And I know you're sort of in this industry really new, and you were like, really? Like people like, it's been a shock for you, hasn't it, to be on the other side of it? But how do you make that decision?
Yeah, I guess it's interesting because when I was brand side, I always wanted to pay people fairly, but like I'd also always try and negotiate and get a good deal. So now I'm going at it from the other side of like, I still want to, I get as much as I can. I guess my very crude calculation before I had an agent was like, I know what my day rate is as a freelancer, so I'd kind of use that as a guide of like, how much time will it actually take me to make the content, and then also add the factor of then the kind of people it's reaching as well. But at first it was a bit of like finger in the air and maybe like a bit of see what I could find online or what I could charge, but you've definitely supported me with that.
Thank you. So moving on to lesson number 3, which is all about letting the creators create the content that they know will resonate with their audience, and that's something we've already touched on. And I think let's go back to Professor Green. So in this event we ran recently with Stephen Munderson, Professor Green, he said, or quote him, he said, brands spend ages deciding if I'm the right fit for their brand, and then they ask me to talk to an audience that's not authentic for the way I talk. So why bother hiring me in the first place? Let me do my job in talking to my audience the way that I know they'll respond. So Lauren, as a creator, I mean, you resonate. I remember you were there in the audience, actually, and that really resonated to you. You did a post about it on TikTok. Just tell me, as a creator, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agreed with everything he said. Like, having the freedom to create the content that you know will work well works best. I think the best... one of the best briefs I had actually wasn't really a brief, which I know kind of slightly goes against what we've said, but I don't know if anyone listens to the Uncensored CMO podcast. It is amazing. And a couple of months ago, I listened to the episode with the CMO of Very. She was incredible. And I came straight home and recorded a review of like a synopsis of the episode. And it was absolutely from the heart. It was such a fantastic episode. And then Uncensored CMO podcast got in touch and asked me if if I would make some more reviews of other episodes. And I think the best bit of that brief was like they were like, look, we've seen a spike in downloads from this video, so we know what you're doing is working. And they kind of just gave me carte blanche to like, how would I structure 3 more videos? And I wrote my own concept just to give them something rather than, I wanted to give them a bit of structure. But the fact that they just completely enabled me, there was no like, you have to 3 seconds in, do this. There was that kind of creative freedom around it. I think was that was one of the most pieces of
I think
work.
that, I mean, given we're here at MadFest, I think that plays really nicely. Rather than going against it, It's, if you were briefing an ad agency on coming up with an ad, you wouldn't tell them which actors to use, what the script looked like. You'd give them a brief, and then you'd let your agency come back with the concept. It's just the same principle. I know, Rob Mayhew does that. He comes back with a script and a concept for brands once he's been briefed properly. So, Carlie, from your perspective, how do you balance the needs of the brand, that you've got your guidelines and what you want, versus what the creator's coming from their angle, saying, well, actually, I want to do this, and this is my brand. So you've got two brands, sort of, how do you manage that balance?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because I've got examples of where we can kind of literally let people do what they want, and I'll give a good example of that, and not even approved it, to having a bit more kind of control on it. So if I use Jay Wicks as an example, when we worked with him as someone that was kind of a long-term ambassador and investor, he knew the product. We spent lots of time getting boxes out to him. He came into the business. Every time we tried to dictate his content, it performed terribly. Yeah. So we had a huge amount of trust with him that he knew us well enough that he could just deliver content. And when he did, it was always the content that performed. So it sounds quite risque as a kind of brand leader to say, go on your own. But actually, for the purpose of that relationship, which was all around driving awareness, driving sign-ups, it worked every time. And every time we tried to control it too much, it just didn't deliver. Saying that, I think, as you kind of scale working with more creators, you have to protect your brand. We probably had a bit more freedom at that point of time because we were still developing our brand as well. So I think now it's about giving the guardrails, right? Yeah. How do we show up in the world? What's our kind of tone of voice? But still making sure that there's enough kind of creative freedom to deliver the content that's going to work. Because ultimately, if you don't, you're not going to get what you want out of it either. And it's respecting the art in the same way you would your kind of in-house creative teams. The creators are an extension of your team, so let them kind of go away and have that freedom to respond, because ultimately they know it better than you. So I think it's just about guardrails and not dictating too much.
I think that's really interesting that you've got now through both the experiences, the guardrails, because I've also seen it with some other creators' content where we've done some posts that have been, like you say, truly free, and others where there was too much restriction put on. You can see the difference straight away in terms of the reaction of the audience and the effectiveness of the content. So, Lauren, I was going to ask you, you immediately know when you put the content out whether it's worked or not. Does that affect the way you think about, so if a brand comes to you and says, I want you to do X, but you know that doing Y would be better, how do you reconcile that in your head? Because you know what's going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't do it if I was being forced into something. But also, as a creator, yes, you want to please the brand, but you're not making content for the people. You're making content for the people that are following you, and that's that's who you've got to remember. Is you're not. Yes, you want to please the brand and you want to do a good job, but that's not who you're making the content for. You're making it for the consumer.
Okay, so let's move on to lesson number 4. And I think Carlie will have some good experience on this one, building longer-term campaigns rather than one-off posts. One of the things I've seen a lot of is one-off posts with creators. And they can be great, but I don't think you really get value back from just doing one-off posts. And it's funny, I think you mentioned the Uncensored CMO. John Evans talks a lot on one of his podcasts about the value of people seeing things repeatedly. We've sort of gone through advertising over the years, and we just thought, you needed to get best 1+ coverage, 2+ coverage. No, you actually need to see things, and as consumers, the more we see things, the more we engage with them. So I'm surprised that we haven't seen creators being used more long-term in campaigns. I've seen some great examples of, there's a brand called Sitecore that's a B2B tech brand in the US. I've been working with Rob Mayhew now for 2 years. And they just, at the beginning of the year, just say, we're going to need you for 5 videos. We don't know what they are yet, but let's work with you on that. And the results have been spectacular, and they come back every time because it's obviously working for them. Whereas if you just get one video, you haven't really even got into a relationship. It's just like I don't want to say a one-night stand, but it sort of feels that way. So, Carlie, you've developed some longer-term relationships. Can you give us any lessons in what's worked for you in that? So relationships rather than one-night stands is the headline.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess just the context of why we got to long-term relationships. When I was in PR agencies for 5 years, it was all one-night stands. So we'd do a big campaign, we'd fly someone in to do a day's work for us, and then that was the end of the relationship. You pay an absolute premium to do that. It's a terrible way to work. how we've kind of worked at Gousto instead is we go in on kind of annual contracts with people. We don't know exactly how the year looks, but we outline a number of kind of days of work, the deliverables we think we'll want. But I think what's really good about the relationships as well is we retain a bit of flexibility in the contract. So, for example, if we don't use the time to deliver certain pieces of work, it can be used in different ways. And actually, I think you've touched on it, Raf. I think people need to see things time and time again.
Yeah.
And how on earth can they feel like a relationship is authentic if it's just one-off?
Yeah.
It just screams like not being genuine at all. So it feels like a big commitment at the time when you're committing money up front.
Yeah.
But my experience of doing that, or our experience of Gousto, has only been really positive. I think the only watch out if you are on the brand side is don't start the year with the deliverables and then let it tail off. Be really aware of what it is that's been committed and make sure you're maximising that time, because otherwise it's just time wasted.
I've got another example of that. When I used to work at Benefit Cosmetics, overseeing influencer marketing there, and we did annual campaigns with influencers we secured the exclusivity on their eyebrows for a year. So we worked with several creators where we booked them in for a year-long deal, and we had a kind of overview of the deliverables, but we sat with them and said, look, these are our plans coming up for the year. This is where we think we could work. And it worked so much better. And we previously had done these stupid, ridiculous, like influencer trips. We went to the Maldives. It was just stupid. And we just didn't see the value back from it. Whereas having that commitment across the year, firstly, it really associated them with the brand. And it just meant that we got so much more value beyond just the deliverables as well. So, yeah, it's a win-win.
I mean, one of the things I've seen is a lot of brands, which I find difficult to reconcile, they want to do a one-off post. They want to pay a creator, let's say, take a number, £1,500, and then in the contract, not even in the brief, you get, we need 6 months exclusivity in the category. Now, as an agent, I don't mind giving exclusivity for the right price, and I think that's important, that I'd rather Lauren worked with a brand for 6 months in the category for all the reasons we've talked about, authenticity, longevity, duplicating that same familiarity, and give that brand that authenticity than jump around from Gousto to some lower form of food service brand that we can't even mention. Because that's going to be benefit for you as a creator and a bigger benefit for Carlie. So, Carlie, how do you also think about exclusivity, and how does exclusivity sort of play in your mind when you're trying to work with talent and creators?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, for full transparency, brands, and we're the same, you're going with quite a big list of us on exclusivity, and you work back from there, right? Because I think everyone's got their own definitions of who's your competitors and who's actually your closest competitors. So, look, those conversations are very challenging, but I think, you have to, as you said, you have to pay the right price, and it's worth doing. Like, it's not fun or conducive to work with creators if 1 month later they're going to work with your arch enemy.
Yeah.
But you've also got to respect the fact that it comes with a price tag, and it's worth it as well. So I think it's baked into, longer-term relationships, make those price tags as well worthwhile, and I think they work for everyone. So.
Okay. So we're going to move on to lesson number 5, which is all about evaluation. So evaluating what success looks like when you've worked with creators. So, Carlie, coming back to you, how do you measure the effectiveness of your campaigns?
Yeah, good question. I think beyond looking at kind of core metrics, there's nothing better than word of mouth, right? So as soon as we started working with like Joe Wicks, it's all anyone spoke to me about. So that's a good sign. So, you can pick up a lot from that, the social mentions and online, but we use a number of different things. We look at the impact on kind of brand love and sentiment. As I mentioned, like some creators were looking to drive sign-ups, so we look at kind of the number of people they're bringing in as customers. So again, it very much depends on kind of the purpose, the focus of the campaign, what you're trying to deliver. But I think kind of intuitively, just that kind of word of mouth and people knowing your brand and talking about that creator in relation to you is only a good thing.
It's interesting picking up on that word of mouth piece. I think they're talking here, Just Eat, I think, another brand in the food space, and they talked a lot about working with celebrity talent and some of the big talent they've worked with, from Snoop Dogg to Katy Perry, and one of their key measures was how much, it's not about the TV ad, it's how much people talk about the TV ad, it's how much people share the TV ad. And they said there was a moment at one of Snoop's concerts when all the fans started singing, did somebody say Just Eat? And they said, well, that's the measure of success for them, that their campaign has now transcended being a piece of communication on a TV ad. So, talking of effectiveness, from your point of view, Lauren, what do you think makes good creator marketing, and what do you think makes bad creator marketing? I'll give Carlie a bit of time to think about this and maybe some examples that you might have seen in the marketplace, but maybe come to you first on that.
In terms of good creator marketing, I guess, I guess when you see something and it kind of resonates with the creator, so you don't feel like they're a sellout. I think that's good creator marketing. I think bad creator marketing, so ad disclosure is a real, like how we're in 2024 and creators still can't like disclose ads properly. I think that's just like terrible. I don't know if anyone saw Hootsuite did a massive campaign recently with a load of LinkedIn influencers, and actually they got loads of coverage about the campaign because everyone was talking about how can you have all of these creators and not, like, I think there was one out of maybe 25 that disclosed it properly. So for me, that's bad creator marketing. It's just like, it's disrespectful to the industry.
Carlie, have you got examples that you can maybe point to of the sorts of good and bad, or any specific examples you'd be happy to name and shame?
In terms of good and bad behaviours?
Or just great campaigns or creators that you've seen doing some great stuff in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I probably won't be able to pull a name from my mind right now, but I think in terms of like good creators, and like, not to suck up to Lauren, but I think the ones that are really standing out are the people that know their values, know what they stand for, and are kind of picking the brands that they work with based on that. So I think in terms of bad creator behaviour, you can tell the creators that wouldn't genuinely use that product. You can tell when there's a 20-year-old pushing a product that's really targeting a 35-year-old, that's kind of not good behaviour from brand sides, or really thinking about who you're working with. So I think the people that are winning at the moment, in the creator space and the brand space, are those that are really looking for those kind of authentic relationships.
And talking of evaluation, we talked earlier about the instant feedback you get, Lauren. Does that affect how you do your next piece of content? So, if you've just put out a piece of content, how do you use that to evaluate and then redefine your next piece of content?
Yeah, I mean, whenever I put a video out, I think the comments are an absolute goldmine. I love them, but they also inspire a lot of some of the future content I make. It's a really easy content hack of just making content from comments. But in terms of valuation, the long tail stuff. So what we find on TikTok is, you'll get maybe an initial flurry, and then sometimes 6 weeks later, all of a sudden your notifications is about a video you did from ages ago, and so there's a long tail effect. But in terms of how I evaluate things as well, it's when people come back weeks later and it's like, oh, I signed up to that course that you recommended, or I listened to that podcast. For me, they've taken an action outside of the app. That's success for me.
So just wrapping up that final lesson, what do you both think the future of content creator marketing looks like? What's the sort of next stage that we're seeing in terms of how brands and creators are working? So Lauren, it sounds like you've got something
I'm going to absolutely fly the flag for B2B creators. I think we are definitely seeing the rise of it. People that are really talking about their careers. I think we've moved away from TikTok being this silly little dancing app, and I think it's such a great platform to educate people and learn from. So yeah, I'm gonna fly the flag for that.
Carlie, what do you think the future looks like?
I think two things from my side. I think the first being that I think creators are going to become an extension of in-house creative teams, and I say that because, and I've touched on it, there's a pure proliferation of content in digital channels that is impossible to keep up with, and brands need to turn that content around. They're going to start looking to creators to help facilitate that, which is a good thing. I think there's going to be kind of more money coming into the industry and relationships to be had. I think number one. And then number two, I think how creators operate in the world of kind of LinkedIn is a really interesting one to watch as we move forward, because it takes us away slightly from that kind of B2C landscape into B2B, and looking at how that evolves will be super interesting. And obviously people like Lauren are at the forefront of that, so really excited to see how that kind of moves forward.
I mean, we've seen a lot of LinkedIn creator activity, a lot of the campaigns that we do with our B2B creators, from Lauren to Rob to Nugget Savings, we're often getting LinkedIn requests now, because LinkedIn's opened itself up as a platform to more engaging video content. and you've got a ready-made audience of people who already follow you. And what's been interesting is to see other creators that follow you that have then got in touch, and it's just a community of like-minded creators.
Yeah, I think with LinkedIn, people are sick of seeing this, like, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I seize the day and all that bollocks. And the fact that now LinkedIn, you've got Reels on LinkedIn, I think shows the move to video content as well, and that kind of, like, you don't have to pretend that, like, you're absolutely smashing it every single day at work. So hopefully we'll see a bit more of that, because I think everyone has this, like, slight cringe on LinkedIn, and I'd like to see that eradicated if we can.
Definitely changing. So, Lauren, I'm going to come to you with one final question, which is, given there's brands and agencies here, what sort of companies would you love to make content for? This is your chance to pitch to them.
I feel like if I say it out loud, it might happen. I always think so. I always talk about Flow Health. I think the way that I've really started looking at how I try to manage my workload around my menstrual cycle. I'm not great at it, but I am really trying to rest on like day 1 and 2 of my period. So I think they'd be a great one. I wear almost every single public speaking event. I wear an Oliver Bonus jumpsuit, so that might be a fitting brand. I'm going to call those two out.
And Gousto. Yeah.
I actually don't really cook, so I actually think Gousto would be great.
Yeah.
For,
okay. We'll sort
for
out
encouraging me to get in the kitchen.
We'll make that happen.
Carlie, I guess a different spin on the question, but are there any campaigns in the social space that you wish you'd have done yourself or been part of that you've seen out there that you wish that maybe that's something Gousto could be doing? It's a difficult question, I know. Or any creators you'd like to work with, apart from Lauren?
Yeah, I think on the creator space, the people that I think are really standing out at the moment I want to work with are people that are the creators that are driven by purpose and selected, and the creators that are challenging the brands that they work with, which I know Lauren does. So, for me, if we're working with creators, I don't know, we're getting them to talk about our sustainability credentials. I like the ones that are coming in and they're challenging us and really holding us to account to like whether we're being honest about what we're communicating. So I think for me, there's there's a whole collective of creatives that are kind of really pushing forward, wanting to work with brands that are genuinely authentic, leading with purpose, wanting to do good in the world. So I think for me, like working with those creators moving forward is definitely kind of top of my mind.
Sorry, have we got some questions? Okay. Yeah. We've got 3-4 minutes. Questions. Go on.
Hello. Hi. We have got a few questions coming through. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, just a quick reminder, open the app, press Q&A. Hello, how are you? So we've got 2 questions. Lauren, have you tried and tested different content types on your channels and found the content that most engages? How long did that process take? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Love that question. Yes. So I always test and learn, and it's how I think I've stumbled upon a couple of like recurring content series. So I have something called Roll on My Radar, where every week I shout out a really good job description. I have red flag roles, where I call out a role that is quite catastrophic. And then I also have like started this new thing called Marvelous Marketing, where I call out 3 pieces of marketing I've seen every week. And they have come from me experimenting with different stuff. I also try to add in like slightly non-work chat. So I've been traveling loads recently. That doesn't really work, doesn't really perform, but I also just do it because I love it. So I'm always testing and learning, because then you might stumble upon a gem and then you can create more from it.
Thank you. Okay, next up, how do I work with Gousto as a content creator?
Find me after this event and give me your email address and we'll make it happen.
Go see Carlie after this, whoever anonymously wrote that. And the third and final question so far, you've got 1 more minute to get your questions in if you have any questions to ask. For all of you, what methods and tools would you recommend to find the best and most authentic creators for your brand?
I know there are a lot of tools out there, and I don't know if you use tools at Gousto to try and find creators. I mean, from an agent's point of view, we need to understand the talent. I need to understand what Lauren is about, who she is, because without that, I can't advocate for her. I'm her voice before it even gets to her. I'm going to turn away deals before it even gets to her because I know they're not right. So that's not a tool. That's just me having that expertise about the talent I work with. From a brand perspective, Carlie, is there anything you use?
I think, so we actually don't in terms of tools, but I think what we rely on is just really understanding who our audience is, who we're targeting, and then selecting on that basis. But I think the main thing that not enough people do is actually spending time in platform and scrolling and looking at the people that are out in the world. I think especially kind of as you move up in kind of marketing careers, you can be really far removed from that. So it's about kind of staying plugged into who are the people that others are talking about, and like really looking at the content as much as anything.
Thank you. So I think we're going to wrap the questions up, and I'm just going to summarise the 5 key lessons for you from today. Number 1, identify the right creators for your brand. Number 2, brief and pay creators properly, fairly. Let them create content they know will work for their audience. Build longer-term campaigns rather than one-off posts, and evaluate what success looks like. So if you'd like to get in touch to talk about working with creators or celebrities, which we haven't touched on today, please get in touch with me. If you want to work with Gousto, you've got Carlie, and if you want to work with Lauren, also get in touch with me. But please put your hands together and thank them both for coming onto the panel today.
Thank you so much, all of you. That was absolutely amazing.